The space between them had shrunk to nothing, and Benjamin Mendoza could feel the heat radiating from James Jones's body as they sat pressed together on the worn leather couch. The movie played forgotten on the television screen, its blue light casting shifting shadows across their faces as James turned toward him with an expression that made Benjamin's heart hammer against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. "Ben," James whispered, his voice rough with something that sounded like years of suppressed longing. "I need to tell you something." Benjamin's breath caught in his throat. This was the moment he had dreamed of and feared in equal measure for the past 2 years. The moment that could either shatter everything they had built together or transform it into something beautiful and terrifying and real. James's hand found his in the darkness, fingers intertwining with a certainty that spoke of decisions already made, of lines already crossed in the quiet chambers of the heart. "I know," Benjamin managed, the words barely audible over the thundering of his pulse. "I know, James, I've been waiting." But to understand how they arrived at this moment, how two roommates who had spent months dancing around each other finally found themselves on the precipice of something that would change everything, we need to go back to where it all began. Back to 3 months earlier, when James had first suggested they watch something together, and the careful distance Benjamin had maintained between them started to crumble like sandcastles before an incoming tide. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. 3 months earlier, Benjamin had been sitting at their small kitchen table, laptop open and papers scattered around him like fallen leaves, when James emerged from his bedroom with that particular energy that meant he had something on his mind. Benjamin had learned to read the subtle shifts in his roommate's demeanor over the months they had lived together. The way James's shoulders carried tension when work stressed him, the way his voice took on a careful lightness when he wanted to ask for something, but wasn't sure how it would be received. "Hey," James said, running a hand through his dark hair in that unconscious gesture that made Benjamin's stomach flip every single time. "You busy tonight?" Benjamin glanced at his laptop screen, at the half-finished article that had been giving him trouble for the past hour, and felt the familiar war between responsibility and desire wage itself in his chest. "Not really," he lied, because the truth was that nothing felt important when James looked at him like that, with those warm brown eyes that seemed to see straight through all his carefully constructed defenses. "Want to watch something? I picked up this movie everyone's been talking about." James held up a DVD case, and Benjamin noticed the way his fingers fidgeted with the plastic edges, a nervous habit that James probably didn't even realize he had. The suggestion shouldn't have felt monumental, but somehow it did. In all the months they had shared this apartment, they had maintained a careful choreography of coexistence, sharing meals and conversation, but always retreating to their separate spaces when evening fell. Benjamin had told himself it was better this way, safer, that the growing feelings he harbored for his straight roommate were better kept locked away in the dark corners of his heart, where they couldn't complicate the easy friendship they had built. "Sure," Benjamin heard himself say, closing his laptop with perhaps more enthusiasm than the situation warranted. "Sounds good?" James's smile in response was radiant, transforming his entire face in a way that made Benjamin wonder how he had managed to convince himself that what he felt was just a harmless crush. This was something deeper, something that had been growing in the spaces between their conversations, in the moments when their hands brushed reaching for the same coffee mug, in the comfortable silences that stretched between them during their shared meals. They had settled onto the couch with their usual distance maintained between them, a careful span of leather that might as well have been an ocean for how deliberately Benjamin avoided crossing it. James had chosen some thriller that Benjamin immediately forgot the plot of, too distracted by the awareness of the man beside him, the way James laughed at the funny parts, the way he leaned forward during the tense scenes as if he could somehow help the characters on screen. About halfway through the movie, James had shifted, and Benjamin felt his heart stutter as the distance between them decreased by several crucial inches. It was such a small movement, barely noticeable, but Benjamin's entire nervous system had cataloged it like a seismograph recording an earthquake. He tried to focus on the screen, on the complicated plot involving stolen diamonds and double crosses, But all his attention had narrowed to the point where James's knee was now almost touching his own. "This okay?" James had asked quietly, and Benjamin realized that his roommate was closer now than he had ever been before, close enough that Benjamin could smell his shampoo, could see the individual lashes that framed those devastating brown eyes. "Yeah, yeah," Benjamin had whispered back, not trusting his voice to remain steady at normal volume. "It's okay." But it wasn't just okay. It was everything Benjamin had wanted and everything he was terrified to want, all wrapped up in the simple warmth of another person's presence. James had settled back against the couch cushions, and Benjamin found himself hyper-aware of every breath, every small movement, every moment when James's attention drifted from the screen to glance at him with an expression Benjamin couldn't quite read. When the movie ended and the credits rolled, neither of them had moved to turn off the television. They sat in the blue glow of the screen, the distance between them somehow both infinite and non-existent, and Benjamin felt the weight of unspoken words pressing against his chest like a physical thing. "That was good," James had said eventually, though Benjamin suspected he had been as distracted as Benjamin himself had been. "Yeah," Benjamin agreed, though he couldn't have summarized the plot if his life depended on it. "Really good." James had turned to look at him then, and something in his expression made Benjamin's breath catch. There was a question there, hovering in the space between them, but before either of them could voice it, James had stood and stretched, breaking the spell that had woven itself around them. "I should probably get some sleep," James had said, but he lingered by the couch as if he too felt the reluctance to end whatever had just passed between them. "Yeah, me too," Benjamin had replied, though sleep felt like the furthest thing from his mind. That night had marked the beginning of a new phase in their coexistence, a subtle shift that Benjamin felt in every interaction that followed. James started suggesting movie nights with increasing frequency, and each time the space between them on the couch seemed to shrink a little more. It was so gradual that Benjamin might have convinced himself he was imagining it, if not for the way James's eyes would find his during the quiet moments. If not for the way conversations seemed to take on new layers of meaning. 2 weeks after that first movie night, James had appeared in the kitchen while Benjamin was making coffee, wearing an expression that Benjamin had learned meant he was working up to something important. "Can I ask you something?" James had said, accepting the mug Benjamin offered him with hands that weren't quite steady. "Of course," Benjamin replied, though his heart had already started its familiar frantic rhythm. "Have you ever—" James paused, staring down into his coffee as if the words he needed might be floating there among the dark liquid. "Have you ever felt like you were going through the motions of your life but not really living it?" The question caught Benjamin off guard. He had expected something lighter, maybe a request to switch up their usual coffee brand or a complaint about their upstairs neighbor's tendency to vacuum at 7 in the morning. Instead, James had asked something that cut straight to the heart of Benjamin's own recent struggles, the sense that he was playing a role in his own life rather than actually living it. "Yeah, man," Benjamin said quietly, setting down his mug and really looking at James, noting the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself as if braced for impact. "Yeah, I have. Why?" James was quiet for a long moment, and Benjamin could practically see him weighing his words, deciding how much truth he was willing to share. "I broke up with Sarah," he said finally, and Benjamin felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. Relief and concern and hope all tangled together in a way that made it hard to breathe. "I'm sorry," Benjamin said, though the words felt inadequate. He had met Sarah only a handful of times, a perfectly nice woman who worked in marketing and had a laugh that seemed just a little too loud for the spaces she occupied. James had been dating her for about 6 months, and Benjamin had spent those months perfecting the art of being supportive while quietly dying inside. "Don't be," James said, and there was something in his voice that made Benjamin look at him more carefully. "It wasn't working. It hasn't been working for a while, if I'm being honest." "What happened?" Benjamin asked, though part of him wasn't sure he wanted to know. The selfish part of him that had celebrated silently when James mentioned the breakup warred with the part that genuinely cared about his friend's happiness. James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "She said I was emotionally unavailable, said it felt like I was always somewhere else, even when I was right there with her." He looked up at Benjamin then, and something in his expression made Benjamin's mouth go dry. The thing is, she was right. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Neither was quite ready to cross, loaded with implications that Benjamin didn't dare examine too closely. He wanted to ask where James's mind went when he was supposed to be present with Sarah, wanted to know what thoughts pulled him away from a relationship that should have been simple and straightforward. But those questions felt too dangerous, too likely to reveal the depth of Benjamin's own feelings. "I'm sorry," Benjamin said again, because it was the safe response, the one that wouldn't shatter the careful equilibrium they had maintained. "Are you?" James asked. And the question was soft but pointed, loaded with meaning that made Benjamin's pulse quicken. Before Benjamin could figure out how to answer that, James had finished his coffee and disappeared into his room, leaving Benjamin standing alone in the kitchen with the taste of unspoken words bitter on his tongue. That evening, James had suggested another movie, and this time when he settled onto the couch, he sat close enough that Benjamin could feel the heat of his body, close enough that when James shifted to get more comfortable, their shoulders brushed and remained in contact. Benjamin tried to focus on the screen, tried to lose himself in the story unfolding there, but every nerve in his body was attuned to the point where James's shoulder pressed against his own. Halfway through the movie, James had turned to him and said, Ben, can I tell you something?" The words were quiet, almost lost under the dialogue from the television, but they hit Benjamin like a physical force. "Of course," he managed, though his voice came out rougher than he intended. "I've been thinking a lot lately about what I want," James said, and his eyes in the blue light from the screen were serious, searching, "about what's been missing from my relationships." Benjamin's heart was beating so hard he was sure James could hear it. "What do you think has been missing?" James was quiet for a long moment, and Benjamin could see him struggling with something, some internal battle that played out in the tension of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the couch cushions. "Connection," he said finally. "Real connection. The kind where you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not." The words hit Benjamin like a revelation and a torture all at once. Here was James describing exactly what Benjamin felt with him, exactly what had been growing between them in the spaces of their shared domesticity. But James was straight, had always been straight, and Benjamin had no right to read more into his words than simple friendship. "That sounds important," Benjamin said carefully, trying to keep his voice neutral even as his heart hammered against his ribs. "It is," James agreed. And then he did something that made Benjamin's world tilt on its axis. He reached over and took Benjamin's hand, threading their fingers together with a naturalness that suggested he had been thinking about the gesture for a while. "James," Benjamin whispered, the name falling from his lips like a prayer and a warning, all at once. "I know this might be weird," James said quickly, as if he was afraid Benjamin might pull away. "But sitting here with you, it's the most real I've felt in months, maybe years." Benjamin stared down at their joined hands, at the way James's thumb was tracing gentle patterns across his knuckles, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. This wasn't friendship. Not anymore. Oh, this was something else entirely. Something that terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. "It doesn't feel weird," Benjamin said honestly, because pretending otherwise seemed impossible when James was looking at him like that, with an openness that made Benjamin feel seen in ways he had never experienced before. They finished the movie like that, hands clasped together on the couch, and Benjamin tried to memorize every detail of the moment because he was sure it couldn't last. When the credits rolled, James squeezed his hand gently before letting go, and the loss of contact felt like a small death. "Thank you," James said quietly, and Benjamin wasn't sure what he was being thanked for, but he nodded anyway. "Anytime," Benjamin replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The dynamic between them shifted after that night, became charged with an electricity that Benjamin could feel humming in the air whenever they were in the same room. James started finding excuses to touch him, casual brushes of fingers when they passed each other coffee, hands that lingered on shoulders when James passed behind his chair, moments of contact that felt both innocent and loaded with meaning. Benjamin found himself living for these touches, cataloging each one like precious artifacts. The way James's hand would rest on his lower back when he reached around him to get something from the cabinet. The way their knees would bump under their small dining table during meals. and how James never moved away. The way James had started sitting close enough on the couch that Benjamin could feel his breath when he laughed at something on screen. It was torture and bliss all wrapped up together, this new awareness between them. Benjamin felt like he was walking a tightrope, trying to be present for whatever was happening while not reading too much into gestures that might mean nothing more than friendship. But it was hard to maintain that rational distance when James looked at him the way he had started looking at him, with an intensity that made Benjamin's stomach flutter and his hands shake. 3 weeks after the hand-holding incident, as Benjamin had started thinking of it in his mind, James appeared in the kitchen on a Saturday morning, wearing an expression that Benjamin had learned meant he had been thinking about something for a while. "Hey," James said, accepting the coffee Benjamin automatically handed him. "Can I ask you something kind of personal?" Benjamin's heart immediately started its familiar frantic rhythm. "Sure," he said, though he wasn't sure he was prepared for whatever question was coming. "Have you ever kissed a guy?" James asked, and the words fell into the space between them like stones into still water, sending ripples through everything Benjamin thought he understood about their situation. Benjamin nearly choked on his coffee. Of all the questions he might have expected, that one hadn't even made the list. "I... what?" "Sorry," James said quickly, color rising in his cheeks. "That was probably too personal. Forget I asked." "No, it's okay," Benjamin said, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. "I just... why do you want to know?" James stared down into his coffee mug as if it held the secrets of the universe. "I've been thinking about things lately. About myself, I guess. About what I want." He looked up at Benjamin then, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made Benjamin's chest tight. "And I keep coming back to the fact that I've never explored that part of myself." Benjamin felt like the world had shifted on its axis. Was James saying what Benjamin thought he was saying? Or was this just curiosity, the kind of wondering that straight guys sometimes had but never acted on? "To answer your question," Benjamin said carefully, "yes, I have." "What was it like?" James asked, and his voice was soft, almost whispered. Benjamin thought about how to answer that, how to describe the fumbling teenage experiments, the few relationships he had had before moving to the city and meeting James. "Different," he said finally, "but good different. Natural, I guess." James nodded slowly, as if filing that information away somewhere important. "I've been wondering," and he said so quietly Benjamin had to strain to hear him, "what it would be like." The admission hung between them like a live wire, crackling with electricity and possibility. Benjamin felt his heart hammering against his ribs so hard he was sure James could hear it. "James," Benjamin said, and he wasn't sure if the name was a warning or an invitation. "I know it's crazy," James said quickly. "I know I'm probably freaking you out, but I can't stop thinking about it." "About?" He gestured vaguely between them, as if the air itself held the weight of what he was trying to say. Benjamin set down his coffee mug with hands that weren't quite steady. "You're not freaking me out," he said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. "But I need you to be sure about what you're saying." "I'm not sure about anything," James admitted, and his honesty was like a knife turning in Benjamin's chest. "All I know is that sitting here with you feels more real than anything else in my life has felt in a long time, and I keep thinking about what it would be like to kiss you." The words hit Benjamin like a physical force, and he had to grip the edge of the counter to keep himself steady. This was happening. This was actually happening, and he had no idea how to navigate it without destroying everything they had built together. "James," Benjamin said again, and this time his voice was barely a whisper. "I know you might not be interested," James continued, the words tumbling out of him like he had been holding them back for too long. "I know I'm probably not what you're looking for, but I had to tell you. I couldn't keep pretending I wasn't thinking about it." Benjamin stared at him, at this man who had somehow become the center of his universe without either of them quite realizing it was happening. James was looking at him with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror, and Benjamin realized that whatever happened next would change everything between them. "You're wrong," Benjamin said quietly, and James's face fell slightly as if he was preparing for rejection. "About what?" James asked. "About me not being interested," Benjamin clarified. and watched as understanding dawned in James's eyes like sunrise. I've been thinking about it too, for longer than you might expect. The admission felt like stepping off a precipice, like finally giving voice to the secret he had been carrying for months. James's eyes widened, and Benjamin could see him processing this new information, recalibrating everything he thought he knew about their friendship. How long? James asked, and his voice was rough with something that sounded like wonder. Months, Benjamin admitted, since probably the second week you lived here, if I'm being honest. James stared at him for a long moment, and Benjamin could practically see the wheels turning in his head, recontextualizing every interaction they had had, every moment of casual touch, every conversation that had felt loaded with subtext. Why didn't you say anything? James asked. Benjamin laughed, but there was no humor in it. Because you're straight, James, because I didn't want to make things weird between us. Because I valued our friendship too much to risk it on something that felt impossible. But what if it's not impossible? James asked, and he stepped closer, close enough that Benjamin could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. What if I'm not as straight as I thought I was? The question hung between them like a bridge that neither was quite ready to cross, loaded with implications that would reshape everything they thought they knew about themselves and each other. Benjamin felt his breath catch in his throat as James moved closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that the space between them felt charged with electricity. James, Benjamin whispered, and the name felt different on his tongue now, weighted with possibility and fear in equal measure. I know this is crazy, James said, his voice barely audible. I know I'm probably messing everything up, but I can't stop thinking about you, about this. He gestured between them, and Benjamin could see his hands trembling slightly. Benjamin's heart was hammering so hard against his ribs that he was sure James could hear it. This was the moment he had dreamed of and feared in equal measure. The moment when the careful distance they had maintained would either collapse entirely or crystallize into something permanent and painful. What are you saying? Benjamin asked, though part of him was afraid to hear the answer. I'm saying that I think I've been lying to myself for a long time, James replied, and his honesty was like a knife turning in Benjamin's chest. I'm saying that every relationship I've had has felt like I was playing a role, going through the motions of what I thought I was supposed to want. And I'm saying that with you, I don't feel like I'm pretending. The words hit Benjamin like a revelation and a torture all at once. Here was everything he had wanted to hear, everything he had convinced himself was impossible, being offered to him by the man who had become the center of his universe. I don't want you to feel like you have to figure this out for my sake, Benjamin said carefully, though every fiber of his being was screaming at him to reach out, to close the distance between them, to take what was being offered before James could change his mind. This isn't for your sake, James said, and he stepped closer again, close enough that Benjamin could smell his shampoo, could see the individual lashes that framed those devastating brown eyes. This is for me, because I'm tired of feeling like I'm sleepwalking through my own life. Benjamin felt something fundamental shift inside his chest, like tectonic plates moving after years of pressure. What do you want, James? The question was simple, but Benjamin could see the weight of it in James' expression, the way he seemed to be gathering courage for whatever came next. I want to stop pretending, James said quietly. I want to stop acting like I don't notice the way you look at me sometimes, like I don't feel something shift in the air when we're close to each other. I want to stop lying to myself about what I feel when I'm with you. Benjamin's breath caught in his throat. What do you feel? Safe, James said immediately, as if the word had been waiting on his tongue. Like I can be myself without having to perform or pretend. Like coming home. He paused, and Benjamin could see him struggling with something. And attracted. God, Ben, so attracted that it scares me sometimes. The admission hit Benjamin like a physical force, and he had to grip the edge of the counter to keep himself steady. This was really happening. James was really saying these things, really looking at him like he was something precious and desired and real. I'm scared too, Benjamin admitted, because honesty seemed to be the currency they were trading in now. I'm scared that this will change everything between us. I'm scared that you'll wake up tomorrow and regret this conversation. I'm scared that I want this too much to think clearly about what it means. What if we figure it out together? James asked, and he reached out slowly, telegraphing the movement so Benjamin could pull away if he wanted to. When Benjamin didn't move, James's hand came to rest against his cheek, thumb brushing across the skin there, with a gentleness that made Benjamin's eyes flutter closed. James, Benjamin whispered, and the name was a prayer and a plea all at once. Can I kiss you? James asked, and his voice was rough with want and uncertainty. Please, Ben, I need to know what this feels like. Benjamin opened his eyes and looked at James, really looked at him, taking in the vulnerability in his expression, the way his hand trembled slightly against Benjamin's cheek, the hope and fear warring in those brown eyes. This was the moment that would change everything, the point of no return that would either shatter what they had or transform it into something beautiful and terrifying and real. Yes, Benjamin breathed, and the word was barely a whisper, but it was enough. James leaned in slowly, giving Benjamin every opportunity to change his mind, to pull away, to preserve the safe distance they had maintained for so long. But Benjamin didn't want safety anymore. He wanted this, wanted James, wanted whatever came next, even if it destroyed him. Their lips met softly, tentatively, like a question being asked and answered all at once. James's mouth was warm and soft and tasted like coffee and possibility, and Benjamin felt something inside his chest break open like a flower blooming after a long winter. The kiss was gentle at first, almost chaste, but then James made a soft sound in the back of his throat and deepened it, and Benjamin felt his knees go weak. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and James rested his forehead against Benjamin's, their breath mingling in the small space between them. Wow, James whispered, and his voice was full of wonder. Yeah, Benjamin agreed, because his vocabulary seemed to have deserted him entirely. Wow. They stood like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing each other's air, and Benjamin felt like he was floating somewhere outside his own body. This was real. No, this had actually happened. James had kissed him, and it had been everything Benjamin had dreamed it would be and more. I've been thinking about that for weeks, James admitted, his voice barely audible. Just weeks? Benjamin asked, and he could hear the smile in his own voice. Okay, months, James corrected, and Benjamin could feel him smiling too. Maybe since that first movie night when I sat closer to you than I should have. You noticed that too? Benjamin asked. I noticed everything, James said, and his thumb was still tracing gentle patterns on Benjamin's cheek. Every time you looked at me like you wanted to say something but didn't. Every time you pulled back when we got too close. Every time you seemed like you were holding your breath around me. Benjamin felt heat rise in his cheeks. I thought I was being subtle. You were, James assured him. I was paying attention. Maybe more attention than I should have been for someone who thought he was straight. The words hung between them, loaded with implications about identity and desire and the stories people tell themselves about who they are and what they want. Benjamin could see James processing this new understanding of himself, this revelation that was reshaping everything he thought he knew about his own heart. Are you okay? Benjamin asked softly, because he could see the wheels turning in James's head, could practically feel him working through the implications of what had just happened between them. I think so, James said, though his voice held a note of uncertainty. This changes everything, doesn't it? Benjamin's heart clenched at the question, at the fear he could hear underlying James's words. It doesn't have to, he said carefully, though the lie tasted bitter on his tongue. Of course this changed everything. You couldn't kiss your roommate, couldn't confess months of hidden feelings, couldn't rewrite the entire foundation of your relationship and expect things to stay the same. Yes, it does, James said, and his honesty was both relief and terror. And maybe that's okay. Maybe things needed to change. Benjamin searched James's face, looking for signs of regret, for the moment when reality would crash in and James would realize what he had done, what he had risked. But instead he found something that looked like determination, like someone who had finally stopped running from a truth he had been avoiding. What happens now? Benjamin asked, because the question felt too important to leave hanging between them. I don't know, James admitted. I've never done this before. I don't have a roadmap for figuring out that you might not be who you thought you were. He paused, and his thumb was still tracing gentle patterns on Benjamin's cheek. But I know I don't want to pretend this didn't happen. I know I don't want to go back to the way things were before. Relief flooded through Benjamin's chest like warm water. I don't want to go back either. So we figure it out together? James asked, and the question was soft but loaded with promise. Together, Benjamin agreed, and the word felt like a vow. James smiled then, and it was radiant, transforming his entire face in a way that made Benjamin's heart stutter in his chest. I have to admit, James said, I'm terrified. Me too, Benjamin said, because honesty seemed to be the foundation they were building this new thing on. But good terrified, if that makes sense. It does, James said, like jumping off a cliff, but knowing you can fly. They stood like that for a while longer, foreheads touching, hands finding each other with a naturalness that spoke of something that had been waiting to happen for a long time. Benjamin felt like he was memorizing the moment, cataloging every detail so he could return to it later when the fear inevitably crept in. Can I take you to dinner tonight? James asked suddenly, and the question was so normal, so wonderfully domestic that Benjamin almost laughed. Like a date? Benjamin asked, though his heart was already answering before his brain could catch up. Like a date, James confirmed, and there was something shy in his expression that made Benjamin want to kiss him again. I know we've eaten together 100 times, but I want to do it right. I want to take you somewhere nice and hold your hand and not pretend that what I feel for you is just friendship. Benjamin felt something warm and bright bloom in his chest. I'd like that, he said. I'd like that a lot. Good, James said, and he leaned in to press another soft kiss to Benjamin's lips, brief but full of promise. I should probably shower and try to figure out what you wear on a first date with your roommate, who you've been in love with for months. The casual way James said the word love made Benjamin's breath catch. But before he could examine it too closely, James was pulling away with a grin that was equal parts nervous and excited. Did you just say you've been in love with me for months? Benjamin called after him as James headed toward his room. James paused in the doorway and turned back, and the expression on his face was soft and vulnerable and completely honest. Yeah, he said simply. I did. Is that okay? Benjamin stared at him, at this man who had just turned his entire world upside down in the best possible way, and felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. It's more than okay, he managed. It's everything. James's smile in response was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of possibility. Good, Ion, he said, because I plan on spending a very long time showing you exactly how much I love you. And then he disappeared into his room, leaving Benjamin standing alone in the kitchen with his heart hammering against his ribs and the taste of James still on his lips. This was really happening. After months of careful distance and hidden feelings, after years of thinking he would never have this kind of connection with someone, James had kissed him and called it love and asked him on a date. Benjamin sank into one of their kitchen chairs and put his head in his hands, not because he was upset, but because the magnitude of what had just happened felt too big to contain in his body. He had been prepared to love James from a distance forever, to be content with friendship and stolen moments and the careful choreography of roommates who were trying not to want too much from each other. Instead, he had gotten this: James's mouth on his, James's hands on his face. James saying the word love like it was the most natural thing in the world. His phone buzzed on the table, and Benjamin looked down to see a text from his sister asking how things were going with his mysterious roommate situation. Benjamin stared at the message for a long moment, trying to figure out how to explain that everything had changed in the span of a single conversation, that the impossible thing he had been hoping for had actually happened. Instead, he typed back, "Things are good, really, really good." It was an understatement of epic proportions, but it would have to do for now. The full story would take hours to tell, and Benjamin wasn't sure he had the words yet for what had just happened between them. He could hear the shower running in James's room, and Benjamin found himself imagining what the evening would hold. A real date, with James holding his hand and looking at him like he was something precious and desired. The thought made his stomach flutter with anticipation and nerves in equal measure. That evening, James emerged from his room wearing dark jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the gold flecks in his brown eyes, and Benjamin felt his breath catch all over again. It was strange seeing James dressed up for him, seeing the care that had gone into his appearance, and knowing it was all for Benjamin's benefit. "You look amazing," James said, and his voice held a note of wonder that made Benjamin's cheeks flush with heat. "So do you," Benjamin replied, and meant it with every fiber of his being. James had chosen a small Italian restaurant a few blocks from their apartment, the kind of place with dim lighting and candles on every table that Benjamin had walked past dozens of times without ever imagining he would be there on a date with his roommate. They walked there together, and when James reached for his hand as they crossed the street, Benjamin felt like his heart might burst from the simple joy of it. "Is this weird?" James asked as they were seated at a corner table, and Benjamin could see the nervousness in his expression, the uncertainty of someone navigating completely uncharted territory. "A little," Benjamin admitted, because honesty had gotten them this far. "But good weird. Really good weird." James smiled at that, some of the tension leaving his shoulders. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this was all a dream," he said. "The whole day feels surreal." "Tell me about it," Benjamin agreed. "This morning I was convinced I was going to spend the rest of my life pretending I wasn't in love with my straight roommate. Now here we are." "Not so straight, apparently," James said, and there was something almost wondering in his voice, like he was still getting used to this new understanding of himself. They ordered wine and pasta and spent the evening talking in a way they never had before, without the careful boundaries that had governed their interactions for months. James told him about the moment he had realized his feelings for Sarah were never going to deepen into something real, about the growing awareness that he was measuring every relationship against something he couldn't quite name. "It was you," James said, twirling pasta around his fork with hands that weren't quite steady. "I was measuring everyone against you, and they all came up short. It just took me a while to understand what that meant." Benjamin felt something warm and bright bloom in his chest. "I know the feeling," he said. "I haven't been able to look at anyone else since I met you." "Not really." "Really?" James asked, and there was something almost shy in his expression. "Really," Benjamin confirmed. "You kind of ruined me for other people." James reached across the table and took his hand, threading their fingers together with a naturalness that spoke of something that had been waiting to happen for a long time. "Good," he said. "I don't want you looking at anyone else." The possessiveness in James's voice made Benjamin's stomach flutter in ways that probably weren't appropriate for a public restaurant. "You don't have to worry about that," Benjamin said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. They lingered over dessert and coffee, neither wanting the evening to end, both of them hyper-aware that they would be going home together, that the careful distance they had maintained in their shared space was gone forever. The thought was thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. "What happens when we get home?" James asked as they walked back through the quiet streets, their hands clasped together in the space between them. "I don't know," Benjamin said honestly. "What do you want to happen?" James was quiet for a moment, and Benjamin could see him thinking, working through the implications of whatever he was about to say. "I want to hold you," James said finally, his voice soft in the darkness. "I want to fall asleep next to you and wake up knowing this wasn't all a dream." Benjamin's heart clenched at the simple honesty of it. "I'd like that too," he said. "I'd like that a lot." When they reached their apartment, James hesitated at the threshold, as if crossing it would make everything real in a way that couldn't be undone. Benjamin understood the feeling. Once they went inside, once they navigated the intimacy of their shared space as something other than just roommates, there would be no going back to the careful distance they had maintained. "Second thoughts?" Benjamin asked gently, because he could see the wheels turning in James's head. "No," James said immediately, and then more quietly, "just trying to wrap my head around the fact that this is really happening." "We can take it slow," Benjamin offered, though the words cost him something to say. "We don't have to figure everything out tonight." James turned to look at him then, and something in his expression made Benjamin's breath catch. "I've been taking it slow for months without realizing it," James said. "Every conversation we've had, every moment we've spent together, every time I've wanted to reach for you but didn't. I don't want to take it slow anymore." The admission hit Benjamin like a physical force, and he had to grip James's hand tighter to keep himself steady. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," James said, and he leaned in to press a soft kiss to Benjamin's lips, brief but full of promise. "I'm sure about you. I'm sure about this. I'm sure about us." Inside their apartment, everything looked at exactly the same, but felt completely different, as if the furniture and walls had been rearranged by invisible hands. The couch where they had spent so many careful evenings maintaining their distance now seemed impossibly small, charged with the memory of all the times they had almost touched, almost crossed the line that separated friendship from something more. James kicked off his shoes and turned to Benjamin with an expression that was equal parts nervous and determined. "Come here," he said softly, and Benjamin went to him like he was being pulled by gravity, like there was nowhere else in the world he was supposed to be. James's hands came up to frame his face, thumbs brushing across his cheekbones with a gentleness that made Benjamin's eyes flutter closed. "I can't believe you're real," James whispered, and his voice was full of wonder. "I cannot believe you're here, and you want this too." "I've wanted this for so long," Benjamin admitted, opening his eyes to find James looking at him like he was something precious and miraculous. "I've wanted you for so long that I forgot what it felt like to want anything else." James kissed him, then deeper than before, with a certainty that spoke of decisions made and lines crossed. Benjamin melted into it, into the warmth of James's mouth and the solid presence of his body, into the reality of finally being allowed to touch and be touched in return. When they broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and James rested his forehead against Benjamin's, their breath mingling in the small space between them. "Your room or mine?" James asked, and the question was soft but loaded with implication. "Yours," Benjamin said, because James's room had always felt like forbidden territory, a space he was allowed to glimpse but never truly enter. The thought of being invited there, of being wanted there, made his heart race with anticipation. James took his hand and led him down the short hallway to his bedroom, and Benjamin felt like he was crossing a threshold into something new and terrifying and wonderful. James's room was exactly what Benjamin had imagined it would be, neat and warm, and smelling like the cologne that had been driving Benjamin crazy for months. "I don't really know what I'm doing," James admitted as they stood beside his bed, and there was something vulnerable in his confession that made Benjamin's chest tight with affection. "Neither do I," Benjamin said, because the truth was that he had never navigated anything like this before either, had never been with someone who was discovering this part of themselves for the first time. "We'll figure it out together." James smiled at that, and Benjamin could see some of the tension leave his shoulders. "Together," James agreed, and he reached for the buttons of Benjamin's shirt with hands that trembled slightly. They undressed each other slowly, carefully, with a reverence that spoke of something sacred being shared. James's hands on his skin felt like coming home and like discovering something entirely new all at once, and Benjamin found himself memorizing every touch, every kiss, every soft sound that James made as they learned each other's bodies. When they finally settled into James's bed, skin against skin under the soft cotton sheets, Benjamin felt like he was floating somewhere outside his own body. This was real. This was actually happening. James was holding him like he was something precious, like he was exactly where he belonged. "I love you," James whispered into the darkness, and the words were soft but certain, like something he had been practicing in his head for weeks. "I love you too," Benjamin whispered back, and the admission felt like finally exhaling after holding his breath for months. They fell asleep, tangled together, James's arm around Benjamin's waist and Benjamin's head on James's chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. It was the best sleep Benjamin had gotten in years, deep and dreamless and full of the kind of peace that comes from finally being exactly where you're supposed to be. Benjamin woke to sunlight streaming through James's bedroom window and the warm weight of James's body beside him. For a moment he lay still, afraid that moving would shatter the spell, would reveal that the entire previous day had been an elaborate dream his lonely heart had conjured. But then James stirred beside him, arm tightening around Benjamin's waist, and Benjamin knew with bone-deep certainty that this was real. They had really done this. They had really crossed every line that had separated them, had really built something beautiful and terrifying and true from the ashes of their careful friendship. "Good morning," James murmured, his voice rough with sleep, and Benjamin turned in his arms to find those brown eyes looking at him with an expression that was soft and wondering and completely content. "Good morning," Benjamin replied, and he couldn't keep the smile off his face if he tried. "No regrets?" James asked, and there was just enough vulnerability in the question to make Benjamin's chest tight with affection. "None, done," Benjamin said firmly, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "You?" "Only that we waited so long to do this," James said, and he leaned in to press a soft kiss to Benjamin's lips, morning breath and all. They lay there for a while, talking quietly and trading lazy kisses, and Benjamin felt like he was living in a dream he never wanted to wake up from. This was what he had been missing all his life. This easy intimacy, this sense of being completely known and completely accepted. "I should probably call in sick to work," James said eventually, though he made no move to reach for his phone. "Probably," Benjamin agreed. "I don't think I'm capable of concentrating on anything today except you." James grinned at that, and Benjamin could see the confidence growing in his expression, the certainty of someone who had finally found what he was looking for. "I could get used to this," James said. "You better," Benjamin replied, "because I'm not letting you go anywhere." 3 weeks later, Benjamin stood in their kitchen, making coffee and marveling at how completely their lives had transformed. The careful choreography of roommates trying not to want too much from each other had been replaced by something easy and natural and right. A rhythm of shared mornings and intertwined evenings that felt like it had always existed. James appeared behind him, arms sliding around his waist and chin resting on his shoulder, and Benjamin leaned back into the warmth of his body with a contentment that still surprised him sometimes. "Good morning, beautiful," James murmured against his ear, and Benjamin felt the familiar flutter in his stomach that James's voice still provoked, even after weeks of waking up in his arms. "Good morning yourself," Benjamin replied, turning in the circle of James's arms to press a kiss to his lips. "Sleep well?" "Always when I'm with you," James said, and the simple honesty of it made Benjamin's heart clench with affection. They had settled into this new reality with a naturalness that spoke of something that had been waiting to happen for a long time. James had officially ended things with Sarah, a conversation that Benjamin gathered had been more relief than heartbreak on both sides. They had told their friends and families about their relationship, navigating the surprise and support and occasional confusion with a united front that made Benjamin feel like they could handle anything together. "I have something to tell you," James said as they sat at their small kitchen table with their coffee, and there was something in his voice that made Benjamin look at him more carefully. "What is it?" Benjamin asked, though the expression on James's face was more excitement than concern. "I got the promotion," James said, and his smile was radiant. "The one I interviewed for last month. They called yesterday." Benjamin felt joy bloom in his chest like a flower opening to sunlight. "James, that's amazing." He reached across the table to take James's hand, squeezing his fingers tight on. "I'm so proud of you." "There's more," James said, and now Benjamin could see the nervousness creeping into his expression. "It's in Seattle. They want me to start in 6 weeks." The words hit Benjamin like a physical blow, and he felt his stomach drop toward his feet. Seattle was 3,000 miles away, across an entire continent from the life they had built together in this small apartment with its worn leather couch and tiny kitchen table. "Oh," Benjamin said, because his vocabulary seemed to have deserted him entirely. "I know it's a lot," James said quickly, and Benjamin could see the fear in his eyes, the terror that this opportunity might be the thing that destroyed what they had found together. "I know we haven't been together very long, and I know it's crazy to ask you to uproot your entire life for someone you've only been dating for 3 weeks. Benjamin stared at him, trying to process what James was saying, trying to understand what he was being asked. "But I can't imagine doing this without you," James continued, the words tumbling out of him like he had been holding them back for too long. "I can't imagine building a new life somewhere else if you're not part of it. I know it's insane, and I know I have no right to ask this of you, but would you consider coming with me?" The question hung between them like a bridge that neither was quite sure how to cross. loaded with implications about commitment and trust and the kind of future they wanted to build together. Benjamin felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he tried to wrap his mind around what James was offering, what he was asking for. James, Benjamin said, and the name was soft and wondering, and full of the kind of love that made rational thought difficult. I know it's crazy, James said again, and Benjamin could see him preparing for rejection, steeling himself for the possibility that he was asking too much too soon. It is crazy, Benjamin agreed, and he watched James's face fall slightly before he continued. But so is falling in love with your straight roommate. So is rebuilding your entire understanding of yourself because of one person. So is finding out that everything you thought you knew about what you wanted was wrong. Hope began to dawn in James's expression, tentative but growing stronger. What are you saying? I'm saying that my life is wherever you are, Benjamin said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff and learning to fly all at once. I'm saying that 3 weeks or 3 years, it doesn't matter because what we have isn't measured in time. It's measured in how completely you've changed everything about what I thought was possible. James stared at him for a long moment, and Benjamin could see him processing this new information, this declaration that was bigger than anything either of them had said before. Are you sure? James asked, and his voice was rough with emotion. I don't want you to feel like you have to do this for me. I don't want you to give up your life here if you're not absolutely certain. I'm not giving up my life, Benjamin said firmly. I'm starting a new one. With you in Seattle or anywhere else you want to go, because home isn't a place anymore. It's you. James launched himself across the table then, nearly knocking over their coffee mugs in his haste to get to Benjamin, to pull him into a kiss that tasted like tears and laughter, and the kind of joy that comes from finally understanding that the impossible thing you've been hoping for is actually going to happen. I love you, James whispered against his lips, and the words were fierce and certain and full of promise. I love you so much that it scares me sometimes. I love you too, Benjamin whispered back. Enough to follow you anywhere. Enough to build whatever kind of life you want to build. 6 weeks later, Benjamin stood in the empty apartment that had been their home, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of all the careful moments that had led them to this point. The couch where they had first sat too close was gone, loaded into a moving truck along with the rest of their furniture. The kitchen table where James had first asked him about kissing men was wrapped in blankets and bubble wrap, ready for the journey to their new life. James appeared in the doorway, keys jingling in his hand, and an expression on his face that was equal parts excitement and nostalgia. Ready? He asked, though Benjamin could see the question went deeper than just their departure time. Benjamin looked around the empty space one more time, remembering the careful choreography of roommates who were trying not to want too much from each other, the months of hidden feelings and stolen glances, and the slow burn of attraction that had finally ignited into something beautiful and real. Ready, Benjamin said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. They walked out together hand in hand toward the moving truck and the rental car and the 3,000-mile journey that would take them to whatever came next. Benjamin felt like he was closing one chapter of his life and opening another, like everything that had happened in this small apartment had been preparation for whatever they would build together in Seattle. Any regrets? James asked as they pulled away from the curb, the apartment building disappearing in the rearview mirror. Benjamin thought about the question seriously, about the life he was leaving behind, the yacht and the friends and the comfortable routine he had built for himself. But when he looked at James, at the man who had turned his entire world upside down in the best possible way, he felt nothing but certainty. Only that we waited so long to figure this out, Benjamin said, echoing James's words from that first morning after. Only that we spent so many months pretending we didn't want what was right in front of us. James smiled at that, and Benjamin could see the confidence in his expression, the certainty of someone who had finally found what he was looking for and wasn't afraid to claim it. Well, James said, reaching over to take Benjamin's hand as they merged onto the highway that would carry them toward their new life. We have plenty of time to make up for it now. Benjamin squeezed his fingers and settled back in his seat, watching the familiar landscape scroll past the window as they drove towards something unknown and wonderful in theirs. This was what love looked like, he realized. Not the careful distance and hidden longing he had lived with for so long, but this easy certainty, this willingness to leap into the unknown because you trusted the person beside you to catch you if you fell. I can't wait to see what comes next, Benjamin said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. Me too, James replied, and his voice was full of the kind of hope that comes from finally understanding that the best parts of your life are still ahead of you. Me too. As their car disappeared into the distance, carrying them toward whatever adventures awaited in Seattle, the empty apartment stood silent behind them, holding the memories of all the careful moments that had led them to this point. The worn leather couch might be gone, but the space where they had first sat too close still hummed with the electricity of that first touch. The kitchen might be empty, but it still held the echo of the conversation that had changed everything between them. Sometimes the most beautiful love stories are the ones that catch you completely off guard, that grow in the spaces between friendship and something more, that teach you that the heart wants what it wants, regardless of the stories you tell yourself about who you are and what you're supposed to desire. Sometimes the most frightening dares lead to the most beautiful discoveries, and sometimes the person you've been looking for has been right there beside you all along, waiting for you to be brave enough to see what was always meant to be. Benjamin and James drove toward their future with their hands clasped together and their hearts full of the kind of love that rewrites everything you thought you knew about what was possible. They had found each other in the most unlikely way, had built something real and lasting from the careful distance of roommates who were trying not to want too much from each other. And now they were ready to see what came next, ready to build whatever kind of life they wanted to build, together. The road stretched out ahead of them, full of possibility and promise, and they drove toward it with the certainty of people who had finally found their way home.